Where is Susan Bole now? That has been the year 2025's most pressing question in the realm of musical talent. If you want to know how to get from relative obscurity to the biggest stage in the world, all you have to do is step onto Britain's Got Talent, and then, suddenly, you vanish from consciousness. I dreamed a dream, but Susan didn't merely sing that. She became a household name all over the world, living the dream. The moment she took up the microphone, the opening chord of that song sounded. Her peaceful existence in her Scottish hamlet abruptly came to an end one night, being adored by fans all over the world as a vocalist. After that historic debut, Susan continued to make albums, tours the globe, and motivate countless fans with her powerful voice and unwavering resolve. However, the cameras shifted their focus to catch yet another novel element. It appeared as though Susan, along with a myriad of other matters that ought to have stayed pertinent, was forgotten. A tiny hospital in a Scottish village in the early 1960s was the site of Susan Bole's birth on April 1st. Her working-class family had 9 children, the youngest of which was her. When she was born, her mother Bridget was in her late 40s. It was quite dangerous to have a child at such age. She was cautioned by doctors that it could pose risks to her and the unborn child. However, Bridget, a powerful staunch believer in her religion, she declined medical abortion. In Blackburn, the Boyle family resided in a modest home. They already had a small budget, and having another child just made matters worse. Susan had an innate sense that she didn't belong right away. This emotion would trail after her for a long time. It was not easy to give birth to Susan. Due to her mother's illness, Susan had a brief period during birth when she did not receive enough oxygen. Her parents were informed by doctors that Susan had moderate brain damage. The destruction at home was far worse. Patrick, her father, had returned from World War II having altered irrevocably. He gave off the impression that he was constantly fuming and emotionally turbulent. Their already overcrowded and impoverished home turned into a terrifying haven. Susan would occasionally be the object of her father's furious rants. She suffered both mental and bodily anguish simultaneously. Susan went on to say that she loved her dad and thought he was struggling with demons he couldn't escape. Yet those distressing recollections created later in adulthood. She finds it difficult to trust others. Neither did my time at school. For a long time, she lived with the stigma of being diagnosed with a mental illness. She was referred to as a slow student by her teachers at school. She was unable to maintain her pace. Instructor was at a loss as to how to assist her in class. She felt out of place and bullied by the other youngsters. Someone would tease her every day. When her epilepsy flared up, she would pass out, and her classmates would make fun of her. Names like Susie and Touchy were hurled at her. She was unprotected by the instructors. They used belts to strike her. On occasion, nearly daily. It was a dreadful and difficult period for her. Regrettably, things didn't improve. In Susan's mid-20s, she experienced her first true love, but her father secretly broke up the connection. After Susan told him she didn't want to talk to him, he eventually answered the phone. That man became a father not long after, to another person. Susan's spirit was crushed. The agony it caused lingered with her forever. For the remainder of her life, it altered her perspective on trust and love. Staying put at home, Susan watched as her 8 siblings ventured out and began their individual lives. She took it upon herself to care for her aging parents, seeing to her father's needs until he died, and continuing to support her mother Bridget until her own death at 91 years of age. Susan's perspective shrank dramatically. She was somewhat reclusive. Few people she knew were there. Taking care of her family came before her own goals. Susan had not relocated much as her siblings established themselves professionally and began families. Susan endured the devastating diagnosis for the years that followed, during which time everyone assumed she had suffered brain damage at birth. However, her perspective quickly shifted upon discovering the reality. Brain injury was not experienced by Susan. She was exceptionally bright, despite having Asperger's syndrome, a kind of autism. The previous perception of her was incorrect. Everything was now made sense of by this new truth. Susan was glad. She could finally see herself clearly, unencumbered by the hideous robe that had desecrated her. She contributed the song Cry, Mere River to a benefit CD in the late 90s. The print run was a mere 1,000 units. She was written about in a local newspaper. She praised her performance as heartbreaking, but nobody outside of her hometown paid attention. Not everyone was aware of her talent just yet. Susan recorded a demo cassette that same year using all of her savings. Her renditions of Killing Me Softly and Cry Me a River featured his song. She distributed the cassettes to radio stations and record labels nationwide. Nobody responded. Nobody ever heard the tapes again. Susan felt a crushing loss. It seemed like nobody was interested in listening to her. Once again, Susan's life took a turn in the early 2000s. Kathleen, her dear sister, passed away unexpectedly. She had consistently been Susan's most ardent advocate. As a result of the pain she felt after her death, Susan was unable to sing. Thus, Susan refrained from speaking for 2 years. She stayed away from everything that brought up music, including performing and taking lessons. Sharing her voice with the world was something Kathleen had always emphasized. Suddenly, that woman, and that voice, my sister's voice, was vanished. By the time Susan began to sing again a few years later, her life had already taken a different turn. Her mother, who was now in her late 80s and required assistance on a daily basis, had become her primary concern. Susan cared for Bridget, cleaned, and cooked in their modest home. As a result, Susan's optimism was maintained by Bridget. "You have a gift and you must use it." These comments, together with the strong link she shared with her mother, brought Susan solace. Susan was able to persevere in her dreams despite her mother's doubts. Because her mother believed in her, had nearly ceased to dream of herself. She chose to be daring. A TV show named My Kind of People was her audition. Unfortunately, she failed miserably at her first genuine shot at being famous on national television. She continued performing at home and at tiny local venues despite the agonizing rejection. With perseverance, she pursued her dream. Susan experienced yet another devastating loss in 2007. Bridget, her mother, died when she was 91 years old. As for Susan, it seemed as if the world had ended again. There was no longer the pillar of support she had relied on. Susan then ceased singing. She spent nearly 2 years cooped up at home. Quiet and grief were her companions in life. Neighbors and friends started to fret. Susan appeared completely depleted of any motivation or vitality. Following her mother's passing, the long-held ambition seemed to fade away. The home where joy and song once filled the air was now surrounded by melancholy and quiet. It was at that time that Susan started to isolate herself. For her, the world revolved around her modest Blackburn home. The drapes remained drawn. Few people in the neighborhood ever laid eyes on her. Susan would go days at a time without uttering a word. She was alone for the most part with the feline in question. Pebbles. She skipped Sunday services. She skipped parties. Her self-esteem plummeted to an all-time low. Once a haven of joy and celebration, the house now felt more like a cemetery. At least until something changed. Something began to shift within Susan. Susan had vowed to her mother before she died away that she would do her best to let the world hear her voice. Thus, she resolved to honor that vow in 2008. It was her intention to audition for Britain's Got Talent. When faced with she had reached the age of 47, her employment status was precarious. The fact that she had never played at a larger venue than her hometown was irrelevant. She filled out the paperwork and traveled to Glasgow to audition, since she was adamant about fulfilling her mother's request. She felt anxious. Going forward, she persisted despite her self-doubt afterwards. Susan explained, "I wanted to prove to myself and to everyone else that I could do it." That vow, that courageous deed, altered the course of events totally. It was the first step, a story that is among the most incredible in the entertainment industry. Nobody paid attention to Susan as she took the stage that April day at Glasgow's Clyde Auditorium. Her hair was disheveled, and she wore a simple gold-laced dress. She was 47 years old. As the camera portrayed how the audience members were visibly amused, evidently not anticipating anything extraordinary from the individual presenting themselves to them. Piers Morgan, Amanda Holden, and Simon Cowell, the judges, exchanged uncertain glances. Everyone in the building was taken aback when Susan expressed her desire to become as renowned as Elaine Paige, a singer. Cameras captured the astonishment of onlookers once more. Before she ever sang a note, it seemed like everyone had already decided she would fail. Everything shifted when Susan sang "I Dreamed a Dream" from Les Miserables. Everything in the room disappeared. Remained quiet. The jaw dropped open in Simon Cowell's face. Amanda Holden was taken aback and gazed. In astonishment, Piers Morgan grinned. The judge's doubts quickly turned to awe in a matter of moments. The audience leaped to its feet as Susan entered the most dramatic section of the song, "The Ground." A thunderous ovation resounded. Immediately following the conclusion of the song, Amanda Holden made a statement that reverberated globally. Her statement, "I honestly think that we were all being very silly, and I think that's the biggest wake-up call ever," was often reiterated by others around her. It cast a shadow over the speed with which we evaluate other people. Incorporating Amanda's remarks into Susan's narrative served as a gentle reminder that genuine skill has no bounds in terms of age or appearance. According to Simon, he had never been so taken aback when watching the program. The effectiveness became a monumental event. It was streamed online to an audience of millions. The theater couldn't contain the ovation that erupted that night. The following day, video excerpts from her audition had gone viral. In just 7 days, the video's viewership reached 25 million. It surpassed 100 million in under 9 days. Her story was covered by prominent news outlets such as CNN, BBC, and the New York Times, all throughout the globe. Susan's voice resonated with listeners. Hope and the rejection of superficial standards in the entertainment industry were symbolized by Susan's audition. A single night altered Susan's life. Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher were among the famous people who chatted about her online. She had become the internet sensation by mid-April. The number of views on her audition video exceeded 1 million. On a regular basis, she was a hot commodity, coveted by news networks worldwide. Even Oprah Winfrey's show extended an invitation. To her, over 50 different countries sent interview requests. Her little chapel in Blackburn, Scotland even attracted sightseers. It attracted sightseers from far and wide, including Japan. Susan abruptly transformed from an unremarkable introvert into a superstar in the span of a few days. At the end of May, she made a triumphant return to Britain's Got Talent for the semi-finals. Memory, a song from the musical Cats, was her choice this time. Even though waiting for her to perform was nerve-wracking, because she was the night's final act, the enchantment was back when she did. Loud cheers erupted from the crowd. Amanda Holden, one of the judges, gushed over her performance. No other artist that night received more votes than Susan. The world witnessed her prove that she had really nailed her first audition. Everyone assumed Susan would take home the trophy before the May finale. The majority of bettors were certain that she would finish first, and her odds were the best. Her audition video had approximately 200 million views by that point. Pubs and community centers in her hometown were filled with people cheering her on. The first ever live online streaming of the final was possible because of the overwhelming demand from viewers. Many were surprised by the outcome, though, when the final tally was in after considering over 17 out of 1 million viewers, just a fraction chose Susan. This dancing company is known as diversity. 1. Second place went to Susan. The news shocked people all throughout the globe. People were discussing the outcome, even in faraway nations. Susan maintained her polite demeanor. Despite her live TV congratulatory remarks, the best people won. Many fans were devastated, and rumors started circulating after the performance that Susan had grown agitated backstage, which shocked fans. "I detest this show," she reportedly shouted as she dashed down the corridor. Some close to her claimed the rumors were exaggerated, but it demonstrated the amount of pressure she was under. Others alleged she sprayed water on someone and yelled at the hotel employees. A few days later, the nation was shocked to hear that Susan had been transferred to a private hospital in London, a clinic that specialized in treating famous people, including members of the royal family. Her loss in the final the night before had hit her hard. She sobbed, yelled at the producers, and then passed out. Paramedics were summoned, and she was transported to the clinic, where doctors diagnosed her with emotional breakdown and exhaustion. Even the Prime Minister of Britain sent her best wishes, and newspapers ran stories on her health. Some reporters even played the what-if game when it came to Susan's immense renown. Her audition had become one of the most watched films ever on the internet, used her family as a guinea pig for stories. One even pretended to be interested in marrying her for the sake of testing her reaction. The British media watchdog agency intervened, reminding newspapers that it was illegal to breach someone's privacy, particularly when mental health was implicated. This incident served as a wake-up call for the media, demonstrating the dangers of instant celebrity. Simon Cowell, who was both a judge and a producer on the program, finally recognized that things had gotten out of hand, made it clear to Susan's family that she was under no obligation to participate in the tour, as is customary for participants in the show. Simon later reflected on the experience, calling it one of the most trying weeks of his life, and he accepted full responsibility for his gaffes. He made a decision that changed the way the entertainment industry treats its stars. Everyone assumed Susan would spend a long time in the clinic, but she startled everyone 3 days later when she announced she would join the tour after all. The public was shocked by her quick recovery. She went on to describe how terrified she was in the clinic for 2 days. She was alone, without a phone, TV, or anyone to talk to. She doubted everything and felt lost. But then she realized she was just exhausted and wanted to sleep. It was a bold and forceful move on her part to return, and her family and friends were there to support her. Susan didn't merely return. She stunned audiences on Britain's Got Talent, performing at 20 of the 24 episodes. Susan's tour was a smashing success, according to both her admirers and the media. She performed in cities such as Aberdeen, Edinburgh, Dublin, Sheffield, Coventry, and Birmingham, where she received standing ovations from the public. She shocked everyone when she dropped her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream. In late November 2009, it sold over 400,000 copies in the UK in a single week, shattering Leona Lewis's record. In fact, she sold over in the US. Her first week sales of over 700,000 copies were the most for a solo female artist since the early 1990s, surpassing the combined sales of the whole top 5 albums in the country. With an initial global sales run of over 2 million copies, the album went on to sell over 10 million copies by year's end, surpassing even major artists like Eminem, Rihanna, and Lady Gaga. Such was the demand for Susan's record that Amazon declared it the most. The album was so popular that some retailers had trouble keeping it in stock. Her popularity didn't stop with just one album, though. In the 2 years that followed, she became the first woman in the history of the United Kingdom to have 3 consecutive albums debut at number 1. These albums were Dreamed a Dream, The Gift, and Someone to Watch Over Me. Prior to this, only illustrious bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles had accomplished anything comparable. Susan, in her late 40s, without any additional training or record label promotion, accomplished the feat. The Gift even achieved simultaneous number 1 in the UK and the US. It was a first for a female artist. By 2021, Susan's album sales had topped 25 million worldwide, with 10 million coming from her debut album alone. But the rest of her albums were all smash hits, with several countries certified platinum. She performed Mull of Kintyre at Windsor Castle for the late Queen Elizabeth's Diamond Jubilee celebration, and her album I Dreamed a Dream went platinum 4 times in the US and 7 times in the UK. Her career didn't end there, though it continued. Joined by the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, Susan Bole became a declared national treasure. Her earnings were as impressive, amounting to approximately $8 million today in her first year alone. Living in a modest government-supported home in Blackburn, Scotland, before her fame, she managed to get by on disability payments. By the end of 2009, her debut album had sold over 9 million copies, and her net worth had risen to between $35 and $40 million. Unbeknownst to many, Susan's instant fortune caused trouble in her family. Word got out that her brother had threatened suicide unless she paid him $50,000 to salvage his business. Susan felt she had no alternative but to give him the money, even though she was unwell with a virus and a throat infection at the time. Jerry eventually rejected the threats, but by then the family's confidence had been eroded, and Susan had made matters worse by spreading false information to other relatives, claiming that Jerry had blackmailed her when in fact this was not the case. When things became too much, Susan sent a monetary gift to another family member. When the recipient didn't express gratitude, Susan became irate and began sending messages which were interpreted as harassment. As a result, the police came to Susan's house and ordered her to cease communicating with the recipient. In spite of the approximately $2 million that Susan had bequeathed to her family over the years, the news of her diagnosis of type 2 diabetes and the doctors' warnings that she would need to had to make some changes to her routine or risk losing everything, including her singing voice. She cut out certain foods and dropped almost 50 pounds before the arrival of CO. Doctors cautioned Susan that what seemed like a harmless disease might quickly turn deadly. so she stayed indoors and followed all the safety protocols. At the age of 53, Susan had finally found love. While on tour in the United States, she met a nice doctor in Florida who didn't know anything about her music but recognized her and struck up a cordial conversation, which eventually turned into something more serious. After amassing over $20 million from her music and tours, Susan remained grounded and unpretentious, continuing to reside in the modest house she had purchased for $65,000 as a child. Subsequently, she acquired the house next door for additional space, which cost slightly more than $100,000. A few $100s a week was her self-spending. She did her own grocery shopping and shunned ostentatious items. These decisions kept her grounded, and in April 2022, Susan had a stroke that almost paralyzed her and made it difficult for her to communicate. She had to rest and heal for about a year, but happily she made a full recovery. In June of 2023, she sang "I Dreamed a Dream" again on Britain's Got Talent, and the crowd went wild, with many people crying. Susan demonstrated that resilience and optimism can overcome adversity. Her recuperation was arduous, but she persevered and trained daily for nearly 3 years, earning Simon Cowell's praise as the most touching performance he had ever witnessed. After a remarkable recovery that took over 1,000 hours of treatment, voice exercises, and physical rehabilitation to strengthen her left side, Susan was able to regain 90% of her voice by early 2025. In April of the same year, on her 64th birthday, she made her social media comeback. After a 2-year hiatus, she sprung back into action with a straightforward message that went viral. "I'm back. Definitely back. Thank you for waiting. New music, new dreams, new beginnings." The post garnered 500,000 likes and 50,000 comments, and she even shared the long-awaited return that fans have been waiting for has finally arrived. And Susan has been keeping them updated with news about her next projects, a documentary, a charity song, and live performances. She has also shared videos documenting her recuperation, her first singing workouts, and happy moments with her team.